Hey everybody, I'm Isabelle. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about overcoming our insecurities. We all have them to some extent. We're only human, and it's human nature for us to always have a little bit of, self-doubt or, certain little hang-ups about ourselves. To some extent, insecurity is natural and it could be perfectly normal and healthy. However, sometimes what happens is that we can have an unhealthy level of insecurity, and that inner void ends up becoming, disabling in our lives because it hinders us from being able to have good, healthy relationships in our lives. I myself, for years, struggled with a lot of unhealthy insecurity, especially in my younger years, when I was in my teens and 20s, because I never truly understood a lot of the things that I understand now. Obviously, life's experiences has taught me a lot. But I did, as a younger woman, struggle with a lot of unhealthy insecurities. And it wasn't until I got older and I realized that I needed to invest in myself and work on myself and the love that I had for myself, because it was affecting my relationships and it was holding me back. And it was affecting my ability to have a healthy relationship with anybody else because I myself wasn't coming into the relationship as a whole. And, it wasn't until after my divorce from my first husband where I just truly hit rock bottom, and I was just so discouraged by having, so many failures one after another, that it truly dawned on me that the one constant in all of these failed relationships was me. And there was, a common denominator, the same investment that I was putting in time after time, and I was expecting I was putting in all the same ingredients, yet I was expecting, a different outcome. Like, I was using the same recipe, but I was expecting for like this magical cake to come out of the oven. And I was baking like crap the same time over and over and over again. And just recently I was reminded of this when I was talking to a friend, and he recently has been in a relationship for the past 6 months with a girl that he was dating. And after a few months of dating, they started to struggle with some issues. She was about 5 years older than he is. And, this became kind of a pretty important point for her. And, she started to voice her, insecurities about, their age difference. And, they would have discussions. To him, it was, a non-issue. Like, to him, the 5-year difference, he had no problem with it. He was all on board for this relationship, really wanted to be with her. But at some point, it really started to manifest itself in all their conversations. And they would start to have arguments about it, and then it would grow into other areas, and it became about the security of the relationship. And at some point, after a few months of dealing with her, not having the comfort around their age difference and a lot of other things that came into play, he basically, I spoke to him this past week, and he said to me, after dealing with it for, these past few months, I just couldn't take it anymore, because I just felt like there was nothing I could do to convince her otherwise. And even though I kept explaining to her that, listen, it's a non-issue for me, clearly it was an issue for her that she couldn't overcome, even though he really wasn't giving her any reason to not, to feel insecure about it. So, this is something that's extremely important, because a lot of times we don't realize that if we don't work on self-fulfillment and having, a good level of self-love and being fully balanced before we go into a relationship, you know, that internal void really has a way of driving people away. Because what happens is that the work that we are unwilling to put in for ourselves is an expectation that we place on those around us. And what happens is that it causes us to place a very unhealthy level of expectation. We set such a high standard in order for us to be able to fill that void. You know, so if we had good inner balance, the amount of love and fulfillment we need would probably be at a much more healthy level. But when we have a void, it causes us to create extreme levels of expectations to help fill that void. And a lot of times what happens is that the work that we're not willing to do for ourselves that we put on those around us ends up becoming very taxing for the people around us. Because they're coming with, you know, the offerings that they're able to provide and invest in the relationship. And on a normal day, that would be sufficient. But for the person that lacks, you know, a good inner balance, that's never going to be enough. It's always going to fall short. It's almost like a bottomless pit. It's like, picture like having a car with like a gas tank that has a hole at the bottom of the gas tank. And it doesn't matter how much you keep trying to fill the gas tank up with gas, it's never going to top up because the gas keeps leaking out at the bottom. So this is something that's extremely important in relationships, because if we're not going in whole, then we're never going to achieve that topping up and that fulfillment that we require from the relationship. And it's an unhealthy expectation to expect those around us to do the work for us that we can't do for ourselves. You know, and this is something that I didn't understand, obviously, in my earlier years. And, you know, I would get frustrated in my relationships because I would think to myself, you know, if he really loved me, you know, he would rise to the occasion and he would make this happen. Like, this is what I need in this moment. But a lot of times, you know, if you lack that fulfillment, you also lack clarity. And it's not that somebody doesn't love you. It's not that they're not willing to, you know, fulfill your needs or, you know, to prove themselves worthy. It's that you yourself don't believe that you're worthy because you've never taken the time to complete that within yourself. And this is something that I talk about in my book, because it is a common struggle for women. And it's one of the biggest reasons why women have a hard time navigating happy relationships, because they're already coming in with a certain internal unhappiness that they've never been able to resolve. And they place that expectation on the person they're with to become their fixer, to become, you know, the caretaker that picks up the slack for what they're unwilling to do for themselves. And listen, it's human nature, you know, mentally, our brain doesn't like to accept change because change means work. And a lot of times, you know, the brain doesn't like to accept the need to change and to put in that work, because that translates into unknowns. And we like to cycle our comforts. We like to cycle things we're familiar with. Those are our comforts. So anytime something requires change, it requires us to, you know, navigate into an area that's unknown, and the brain doesn't like that. But the unfortunate part is that unless you're willing to put yourself out there, unless you're willing to endure that trip, that journey of change, you're never going to evolve and mature into the full, you know, balanced person that you need to be, that a healthy relationship requires. You know, listen, certain recipes require certain ingredients. And if you're looking to bake, you know, a super duper fabulous, really scrumptious cake, there are certain ingredients that are required to go into it. And even one ingredient that's off can throw off the entire recipe. So it's extremely important that we do face our insecurities and we don't ignore them. It's unhealthy to place that expectation on those around us. And at some point in our lives, it's important to rise to the occasion and to become our own emotional caretaker and say, you know what, for once, I am going to take the time to make sure that I am 100% topped up before I go into my next relationship, before I tell somebody what I need from them. Let me at least see if it's something that I can do for myself. And then at that point, you know, you'll start to notice that relationships change. You know, happiness comes a lot easier. And at the end of the day, that's all we truly want, is to find, you know, like just ultimate happiness. And, you know, for the relationship to be balanced, you know, for one partner to not feel like they're always picking up the emotional slack. So listen, you know, it's not a form of weakness, you know, having insecurities. We all have them. To some extent, you know, everybody has them to a certain level. And hey, it's healthy. There's times that I turn to my husband and I'm like having a fat day. I'm like, does my ass look okay in these pants? I mean, listen, that kind of stuff is normal. But, you know, you want to make sure that you remain your own emotional caretaker and that you nip things in the butt. And if you do have voids, at some point, become the change that is required for your future to become much more balanced and a lot happier. Because at the end of the day, that's all it's really about, is happiness. So love yourself and be happy. And I'll talk to you guys next time.